If you're disabled, there's a thing called Social Security disability insurance, and you can get payments from the government to help to care for yourself if you can't work. But what if it took 7 months to just get your case adjudicated? Hi, I'm Scott Ott with Steve Green and Bill Whittle. And gentlemen, on this right angle, I'd like to talk about this federal program that's administered at the state level that is now so backlogged. Let me just give you a sense of this, state by state. This is how many days it takes to process an application for the Social Security disability benefit. This doesn't mean that it's going to be favorably processed or adjudicated. This just means this is how long it takes to process it. In the state of Texas, 214 days. In the state of Florida, 225 days. These are some of the better ones. In the state of Wisconsin, 227 days. Georgia, 246. Delaware, 261. South Carolina, 249. It has gone from an average of 3 months now to an average of 7 months before you get the initial ruling from the agency on whether or not you qualify for disability payments, and 2 out of 3 claimants are denied on the first attempt. The backup is caused in part, it's always been slow, but the backup is caused by a variety of factors. During the pandemic, a lot of these offices shut down and they were incapable of taking computers home and working remotely. And so you would think, oh, well, this is going to cause a problem. Well, the number of people applying for disability benefits dropped pretty precipitously during the pandemic because they couldn't get into the offices to apply for it. Nevertheless, those agencies fell further and further behind. It's a federal program, but it's administered at the state level and typically by relatively low-paid people. And the pay is dependent on where you are. For example, if it's in Puerto Rico, the average examiner who looks at these claims for disability gets paid about $16,128 a year. But if you're in Washington, D.C., $75,506 a year, and Florida and Minnesota are in between. Texas, just after years of trying, just got a raise for their people by about a $16,000 raise. The federal government had to approve that. And now they're up to $55,000 a year. But for that $55,000 a year, what you're doing is on a case-by-case basis. For each applicant, you're looking at hundreds of pages of medical and income information. It used to be that the average number of document pages that you had to examine was about 160. The average is now 949 pages of documents. As a result, to learn how to do this job takes about 2 to 3 years on average. However, a lot of people aren't sticking around that long. They are quitting in vast numbers. Within the last year or so, they lost by retirement and resignation a quarter of the workforce that does this kind of processing around the country. The people at the state level say it's because of the federal regulations that make it so difficult, and because in some cases, you're paying some guy $17.50 an hour to do what one of them described as play doctor. He's got to figure out whether this person is worthy of getting disability compensation. And I just read this. It was a great, really well-written piece in the Washington Post by a journalist whose name is Lisa Rain, and just really well-documented and investigated. Oh, by the way, in the middle of the pandemic morass, Social Security decided to introduce a new computer system to the process, and they spent about $153 million on this new case processing system. The training, of course, got bogged down. The options that the new system provided were limited. One particular glitch in the system stopped payments to doctors. And the old system, because it's administered on a state-by-state basis, a lot of states had paid for customizing the system to make it run better for their purposes. And so now you've got this one overarching new system coming in and basically wiping out all the gains that the local states had made in trying to improve their systems. It's just unbelievable. Part of the problem is they can't hire enough people. They can't keep the people. They struggle with the battles between state, local, and federal authorities. Oklahoma, by the way, recently posted 100 examiner jobs. And you would think, for every 100 jobs you post, you may get 1,000 applications. They got 70. 70 applicants for 100 jobs. And the guy in charge of it said, and we weren't getting the best of the best.
Oh, you think?
Wants the work. Gentlemen, This is another, I hate to do this because last week we talked about New York's mentally ill homeless problem, and I kind of was wringing my hands and saying, this is one of those situations like, what do you do about it? Well, back in the 1950s, kind of as a sop to conservatives, this kind of program was set up at the federal level with state management because conservatives would prefer that it would be handled at the state level. But how can you handle this at the state level if you have to do what your federal overseers say? You can't increase pay until they say you can, and you have to go with their guidelines. This just seems like another impossible situation for government action.
Yeah, the states aren't running this. The federal government just offshored the manufacturing to the states. We've got to have a very honest conversation here, and there's only one conclusion to this debate, and that is the federal government sucks at this. When it comes to administering or distributing benefits, the stories come down to basically one of two options. Either people who shouldn't be getting money are getting crap tons of money from Washington, or people who should be getting money because they are actually disabled can't. And it's really easy. See, this is where incentives come into play. It's really easy to give away money to people who don't need it because, hey, who's going to complain about it that really has a voice? You can get a lot of people on your side by handing out money that shouldn't be going out to them, like ditching the work requirement for welfare, which was buried in the Obama's stimulus thing back in 2009. It's very difficult to determine at a federal level with federal rules whether somebody is actually disabled. If your church has some kind of aid program, it's a sure thing that the priest or the pastor knows the guy who injured his back at work and can go, wow, hey, everybody, we've got a hurting brother here. We're gonna all pitch in and help take care of him and his family, and there's no paperwork involved. Scott, what you just told me is the exact opposite of that, and it's because we went to Washington, D.C. to look for our solutions instead of right here at home.
Scotty, I hate getting quotes wrong, and you know these things better than I do. What is the exact quote? One of the founders said that our form of government is only suited to a virtuous people. It's totally inappropriate for any other kind of society.
John Adams, and I don't remember the exact quote, but yeah.
Close to that. So basically what he's saying is a republic that is allowing a great deal of freedom is predicated on the idea that the population, or at least the vast majority of the population, is virtuous and will do the right thing. And if they do the right thing, then we don't have to have prisons and police and cameras and all the rest of it.
Now, that said, Adams was not one of the authors of the Constitution, and the authors of the Constitution did everything they could to make sure that we defended ourselves against the non-virtuosity in government.
Okay, but basically, I'm not. Look, just so we're clear on this, the genius of the founders is the idea that the Constitution understands that people are fallible, and that we're going to design a system that is going to block the natural impulses of people for power and money and all the rest of it. But the fundamental premise behind the American experiment is that you can let people govern themselves so long as they're fundamentally honest, good people, and if they're not, then the thing falls apart. Obviously, some significant percentage, possibly a majority of these applications are fraudulent. I personally know at least 2 or 3 people, not well, but I've met them face to face and heard them say that essentially getting a doctor to approve them as a disability, that is the all-time life jackpot as far as life in America goes. If they can be certified as having a disability, they've got income for the rest of their lives. And so if you have people that are trying to cheat the system, then you will overload the system. And what that means is that the people who are trying to cheat the system are depriving the people who need it of it because they're fundamentally immoral people. The thing we have to be careful of as conservatives is we see so much abuse and so much fraud and so much lying about these kind of things that we kind of want to say, well, screw the whole program. But look, there are people out there who are in need, and you can say, well, it's not the government's responsibility. I agree, but the government should be the last line of defense, not the first line of defense. A civilized society does not have beggars in the street, who can't walk.
Yeah.
But a healthy society also doesn't have people pretending to be beggars in the street who can't walk so that they can get the benefits.
The reporter found a couple who lives in their car, and they drive back and forth to get the husband's cardio care that he needs to get, and to go to the office where they need to talk to people. And they've been waiting, I forget how many months now, some tremendous amount of time for their case, and it's more than a year that they've been waiting to get their case adjudicated. And she's like, the woman is like, just tell us that we're rejected so we can start the appeal process and we can go through the administrative law judge, just give us a decision at some point. And in some state offices, it may have been Texas, I forget which one, there are like 70,000 in the backlog cases that they're still trying to plow their way through. One of the people who work there said, not only do we not have anything to tell you when you call in and ask what the dispensation of your case has been, we don't even know how to tell you who to talk to who would know. Because it's, nationwide, there's something like 1 million people waiting to hear the dispensation of these things. Part of me, as I was listening to it, I was thinking, I'll tell you what, why not just give everybody who applies a stipend and say, we're going to put this as a lien against your house, or we're going to garnish your wages. If it turns out that we're suspicious that something dastardly is happening here, then we're going to have recourse and we're going to take this money back. So you need to know going in that we're going to get our money out of it. But if you got a legitimate claim, we don't want to make sure you get this money right away, or the doctors get it right away. So that was my one genius solution, of course, totally unworkable. And the other was put it in the hands of the doctors. Now the doctors would say, no. Like, we don't want to make this decision. It's one of those things where what Steve said is, can government even do this? And the example you just gave, I was in a Sunday school class this Sunday morning, and a lady got up and she said, hey, I just wanted to let you know that last week we mentioned to you that there was a family in the church that's really hurting, and so here in the class kind of coordinated some efforts to help these people. And the father in this family approached me this morning and came up to me and said, hey, I just got a box with a check for $2,000 in it. And I just want to let you know how important that was to our family and what a difference that made. And what I thought immediately was, and this was done by people who know him and love him and are there for the long haul, not by, he's not a file folder in some government steel cabinet. He's a person who has children and a wife, and we know him, and we're in a supportive community.
And one of the reasons he got the check was because people knew him well enough to know he's not pulling a con on people. He's not going to use this money to jet off to some vacation someplace. That's what I was talking about when you get to the moral character of people. So just for full disclosure here, back when I was in my late 20s, I was still living in Florida, and I had ruptured a disc in my neck, and I couldn't turn my neck. I had to turn from the waist. I was just constant pain, and I didn't have any money at all. So the doctor said, go and talk to vocational rehab, state of Florida vocational rehab. And I said, okay. And I went in there, and by happy coincidence, I was the first patient, or the first applicant, I guess, in a person who had just started at vocational rehab. So she was there, and her supervisor was there as well. And I basically went in and said, I don't know if there's anything you can do for me, but I'd certainly be grateful for any help that you can have. So I needed a discectomy. I made a little incision here, and they apparently avoided the main pipes, and they pulled the disc out and fused bones in my neck. And I don't know, I think it cost like $14,000, which I didn't have. The state picked it up. Now, before I took this help, I said, I'm very grateful about that. I don't really know what to say. And the supervisor said, let me put it to you this way, Bill. If we don't pay for this operation, you probably won't be able to work, and you're going to be a charity case for the rest of your life. You're going to be on disability for the rest of your life. On the other hand, if we do pay for it and you do go back to work, then what you'll eventually pay in taxes will not only pay us back, but you'll pay us back many times over. And that's what made me accept the help. And sure enough, that was a wise decision on the part of Florida, because I paid a lot more money back to them than I ever took out. But my point of it is the attitude that you went in there with. And when the young person who had to finally make their first decision, and I was the first case, when they approved it, I thanked them so profusely. And they said, it's so unusual to hear that. I said, what do you mean? And she said, people come into our office demanding their money. They come into this office demanding their money, talking about their rights, talking about what's owed to them. They come in here with this sense of total entitlement, total ingratitude, as if the state is holding on to, stole money from you, and has been keeping it in a vault someplace.
Well, in a way, Bill, you can't blame them, because it was sold to us as Social Security disability insurance. It is as if we have paid a premium.
Yeah.
They're taking money out of our paychecks. They're taking lots of other money from us. Mm-hmm. And it's the same motivation that drives local elected officials to say, hey, we got to apply for this program or that grant
that we don't
or whatever,
need. Yeah.
because we need to get the money we sent to Washington back in our district. And everybody's doing the same thing. It strengthens Washington, it weakens local communities because they're utterly dependent upon the distant sources, and it impoverishes us all.
But that attitude of entitlement extends beyond people who have legitimate claim for disability.
Sure.
Right? There are, like I said, there are a number of people out there, a large number of people out there who consider a statement of medical disability from a doctor to be the jackpot, that they're set for life, at least on some level. They don't ever have to work again. And you occasionally run into people who say, well, we got a job for you. I can't take that job. If I take that job, I lose my disability insurance or my welfare check, or whatever the case may be. And so you can look at all kinds of political and administrative solutions to this, but ultimately what you're stuck with is honest people who need help deserve to be helped. And the reason you've got 900 pages of documents to go through is because the state, who doesn't know anything about you, unlike the person in the church that you just mentioned, is going to take 900 pages to decide whether or not you're an honest person or not. And if it turns out that becomes the smart play, that you're a sucker if you don't take the money, then it's just a matter of time. But when you deal with actual compassion and charity, as you mentioned with the church, the first response of a person who seems to me to be worthy of the help is a sense of enormous gratitude. And there was a time very recently in this country, certainly up until World War II, during the Depression, where it didn't matter if you were starving, you would not take government help because you did not want to be seen as the kind of person who was riding for free. It was better to be hungry than to be seen as somebody who was living off of somebody else's sweat. And when you've got a society like that, you're in good shape.
Well, and
when you don't, you don't.
I was going to say that the reason why it's 949 pages now instead of 160 pages is because of increasing federal requirements.
Of course.
That more documents. And then, of course, doctors are expected to create more documentation. So the burden.
But that's to prove.
Yes.
That's to prove whether they qualify or not,
yeah.
Right?
So the burden has been increased upon doctors, and the burden has been increased upon these so-called examiners who work for the disability insurance agencies at the state level, who are really complying with federal law. And a lot of these state offices run on a reimbursement system. So they operate and they have to ask the federal government to give them the money that they just spent operating, and doing what they had to do. And people are losing their minds working these jobs because they don't know. I mean, they look at 500 pages or 900 pages of documentation and like, I'm supposed to decide whether this guy's going to get compensation or not. I've got the power of pain or torture in my hands. I don't want to make that decision for $17.50 an hour. I mean, that's just not fair to ask of anybody.
And they're trying to manufacture trust out of paperwork and regulation. That's not how human beings work.
So I know that, people expect us to solve the problems of the world, but it's just another instance where we feel as humans that we should do something, that something must be done for people who are disabled, for example. And then we hear that people who are disabled are waiting 249 days for the adjudication of their claim to get disability insurance. And we say, well, somebody should do something about that. And it is at such a massive scale that we cannot imagine what could be done. Like, you need to sort of take it down to the local level and say, okay, Bob and Cindy and their 3 kids are in a rough patch right now. Bob just lost his job. Cindy actually injured her back and can't walk around freely. And they've got the 3 kids and they are about to lose their home and they can't afford the payments on the car and they don't have any local relatives to be able to help them. What do we do about Bob and Cindy? And that's not how the system works. Bob and Cindy are, case number 67532870. And that's sitting in a pile somewhere in a metaphorical warehouse, like Raiders of the Lost Ark at the final scene, where some guy's pushing a cart down there going, gee, they sent me back here for Bob and Cindy's file. I'm not sure whether that should be filed under B or C, but I know it's been here since BC something. And I just think we have to find a way to engage with these issues and look around us and see, like that lady in Sunday school did, and see, okay, who's hurting? Who needs help? Maybe this family in our church doesn't have to rush right down to their local Social Security office to apply for something because their brothers and sisters in Christ rallied around them at their moment of greatest need.